Hi everyone, when we just left off, we had just finished this smash the bugs from left to right scene, which had us use our new unhide icons function, which removes the hidden class so that we can see an icon that's on the DOM and not visible. And we were using both the hide and unhide icons, the functions at the same time, every single time an icon was clicked. But we also made sure to add all the different scenes that we're going to be using for the remainder of these tutorials so that you don't have to write all these really long icon arrays of objects. So to get used to navigating through this file of scenes, because there's a ton of scenes, this is about 1,000 lines of code, what you should get used to is kind of collapsing an object so that you can navigate to the next scene. And you can see here's one that's open, and you can see click the yellow ghost. We had done this one already, and we used our move icon function that we built 4 times in that scene, so we'll collapse that one. Keep moving down. You can see there's this click the paper airplanes function, object. Click the frogs from biggest to smallest object for a scene, and then you should see this object that starts with an instructions and an empty string. And then you see this icons array of 2 icons where we have this pay attention. They're both text icons, and click here to continue. So let's have a look at what this scene's doing. All right, and it's level 10. So if we call level 10, all right, and then we call next scene, all right, you can see pay attention, click here to continue. And when I click here to continue, you can see there's these 3 numbers that are drawn, and then on its own it just jumps to the next scene. All right, so that means there's something going on where the level is being increased and next scene is being called without us doing anything. And you can see those 3 numbers add up to 9, and if you click that one, it's correct. But the idea is on level 10, all right, we have our scene that says click here. It runs this scene, but then it jumps to the next scene on its own. And it's using a really well-known timing function and asynchronous function called set timeout. So let's look at that really quickly. Look at the documentation of this function, and you can see it's a method of the window or worker global scope. So it's a global scope function that allows us to set a timer which executes a function or a specified piece of code once the timer expires. So the idea is we call a function and then run it after a certain amount of time. And so that's usually given in what we have is our function is our first argument, and then the amount of time is our second argument. And this is like kind of the most common way to do this. And we're going to show an example of that. So the idea is we can, in this scene, we'll run this function to see what it's like. So we can call set timeout, all right, and we'll say let's call a function, an anonymous function that's going to just console.log the string done, right? And we'll close this function, and then we'll pass a second argument, which is 2,000 milliseconds or 2 seconds. And so we run this, and you can see it returns a number, and then after the 2 seconds have expired, the log console log done. So this function was executed after 2 seconds. So I'll do it again, and you can see each time it gives a unique number. All right, and that's a really useful number that we can actually save that value and then use it later if we want to clear the timer before it's done. So we can say let set timeout ID equal this function. So I'm just going to copy this and paste it and hit return. And you can still see after 2 seconds it ran the function and just console log done. But you can see set timeout ID is there, right? But we can rerun this function. We can call set timeout ID and set it equal to, again, the same function. All right, so we're calling it again and hit return. And you can see now it's telling us what the number is, okay, and it's done. And so why do we bother to save the value? So if I call set timeout ID, right, that number's there. All right, so what does this allow us to do? Well, if I set this function to say 10 seconds, all right, and we run it, and then we call clear timeout, and then we say the set, hopefully I'll do this fast enough, timeout ID. Oh, I was too slow. Let's do it again. So we'll run it, and then we will clear set timeout ID. So here's our value, and we say, let's clear that. And we'll wait a little bit. And I think at this point 10 seconds have passed. And notice done was never logged because I cleared it before it finished. So just to confirm that, let's make it super fast. We'll say in 2 seconds, you can see it runs the function done. But if I call it in 2 seconds but quickly call clear timeout, done is never called. So this is our method of creating a timer but also clearing it if we need to. And so how are we going to use that? Well, the first thing we're going to do in the Moron test in moron.js is we're going to add a timeout ID variable, just like we were using in the log. So we're going to call timeout ID, and we're not going to assign a value to it, but it does exist. And now this is where we're going to also use in our scenes our start function, our start value. So the idea is in the pay attention, click here to continue, there is an answer, so it gets to just use our main function. All right, the idea is that main function says, okay, if the right one is clicked and that's all the answers that are needed, which is based on our check icons, it's like, hey, if the click count equals the number of answers needed, then go to the increase the level and go to the next scene. So that particular scene, that particular scene is fine. All right, so this is the one that's like in a funny way, a typical scene, even though it's an instruction. It's this next one where we draw our three numbers, 1, 3, and 5. We need to go to the next scene without the user doing anything. And to do that, there is no answer, there is no click that's needed. What we need to do is add a function here that calls our set timeout. So what we're going to do here is we're going to set this equal to a function. All right. And in this function, just like we have our main function, but we don't care about values for icon and eye. We're just going to say, let's take that value, right? Timeout ID. So we're going to say timeout ID, and we're going to set it equal to the set timeout, and we're going to create an anonymous function in there, and I'm going to just show you after 2 seconds we're going to run this function. Okay, so inside here, what do? We just have level go up by 2 and then go to next scene. Okay, so that's there. It's in this particular scene. Say, hey, after 2 seconds, go up a level and go to the next scene. But this start key is not called anywhere in moron.js. So right now, even though it's here, and we can go to level 10 and call next scene. All right, we can click here to continue, but nothing's happening. 2 seconds have passed and it's not going because we need to tell our scene function, our play scene function, to look for this start scene function if it's there or not. All right, and then if it is there, run it. So we've created for the first time, normally most of our scenes, so let's look at a previous scene just for reference. most of our scenes, we can look at the one below it, are going to have the start value to be null. But in this particular scene, where we're drawing our 3, 1, 3, and 5 icons, and we want to go right to the next scene after 2 seconds, this scene start is not null, and we want our scene to run it. And so where are we going to do that? Well, if you think about it, we want it to exist before the scene plays and waits for someone to listen. So we have our check icon function right here. So there's no checking of icons necessary. So we need this to play to look for this immediately. And so what we're going to do is say, use an if statement and say, if scene based on its level has a start value, meaning if this is not null, because null is falsy, so if it's not null, this is going to resolve as true. And if it's true, we want to say scene level dot start and then run that function. We'll just call that function. So the idea is, like, if there's a start function, run it. And that's the first thing that happens when you play the scene, okay? Because the scene has already been drawn, and we need to now make sure that we get to see if this start scene is working. So let's see if this works. All right. So now we're here. We can call level 10, and we can call draw next scene, and we click here to continue, and it moved ahead. So that means we have our timer functioning, and we have, for the first time, incorporated our new start key, and we're going to also have finish keys. So you can think about every scene has a start, main, which is where the logic happens, and a finish. Okay, so main is for our logic. Start is if we need to do something, that we need to run a function as soon as the scene starts. And then finish is going to be if we need to run a function after someone has completed all the clicks that they're supposed to click. And we're going to see that in our next tutorial, how an example of the finish function can be called and used to add a little trickery.